Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming to this session on rubrics. And we're actually going to go a little more broad today and not only talk about rubrics, but also talk about grading and what are some of the things that influence our grading, our values, past experiences, identities. So we're going to start today with just a free write activity. So we'll let people kind of filter in, but I've got two activities for everyone to do just in our first 10 minutes. So we'll be, feel free to go camera off, but when you get a chance, tell me a little bit about what brought you to this session today. Go ahead and throw that in the chat. And then the rest of the time, I'm hoping everyone will spend a little bit of time just reflecting on these two questions. What values are present for you as you grade and respond to student work? How do your values guide how you engage with your students? Go ahead and wrap up your final thoughts. Okay. I wanted to take an opportunity because I know rubrics, there can be a range of perceptions and feelings about them. I'm curious to know, using either the Zoom reactions, so those would be, the smiley face, thumbs up, any of that, or typing into the chat, what's one word or reaction or emoji that describes your current feelings or reactions to grading, using rubrics, and engaging students in the grading process? Great. Thanks, everybody. I'm seeing, there's mixed experiences. Gerard is new, so feeling a little clueless. Ben, Marcy is very comfortable. Norm, appreciating the structure, that come with rubrics, help to make things pretty concrete and clear for students and helps engage them with more structure. That makes sense. All right, well, thanks everyone. So I wanted to just briefly go over some of our aims for today. And so our values guide a lot of how we teach and how we engage students, and we'll get into that, but that's something that I think is important as we're thinking about the year ahead of what can we share with students about our values? How can we manifest those values in intentional ways in our course design and grading? I really think it's important to hear from other faculty, like what came up in the last session, which was like, there are some things that we're all wrestling with. So let's talk about those things. I'm going to share some examples and model the way through this session on a few things that you can try in your classroom for engaging students. My background, I was an online teacher. I've done some Zoom facilitation, but I think it's really important to just try out different things. And I'll show you what has worked for me, but I hope others feel encouraged to share too. We'll do a brief overview of rubric design. And then I'm hoping that to give you all some time just to think about if there's anything that you're wanting to change around grading or rubric, just to give a little bit of time and support to allow you to think about like what's something you might reasonably try. So going back to the values piece, I'll share resources and we'll go over a brief overview. But there are a ton of wonderful technical resources available to faculty on rubric design. And I wanted to balance with those that are more, like I said, technical approaches to something that might help with filling in more of the content around what goes into a rubric. And these are especially some of the intangibles. So thinking about fast grading, clear and equitable communication with students oftentimes doesn't come down to the technical aspects of assignments, but more the intangibles and dispositions that we're hoping students model in their class assignments. I'll share a little bit about my story and my thinking. It's something that I tried in my classroom that was really drawn all the way back to my undergraduate experience. When I was a senior, I was getting close to graduating. I took a script writing seminar as part of my undergraduate, and this was not part of my major. It was one of my major electives. It must have been one of the last assignments I did, and I was writing a script, and it was the project we'd been working on for several weeks. And I got feedback on my first draft, and quite a few changes, but there wasn't any explanation as to why I should make those changes. And so, I'm coming to the end of my undergraduate experience and going like, oh, like, well, no, I know some things about writing. I was part of this program. I don't understand why I need to make these changes. They felt pretty subjective to me. But I'm also coming to the end of my academic experience and reading the instructor thinking, okay, I know that if I make these changes, I'm going to get an A on this assignment. I don't know why I need to make them, but I know that's what's the outcome is likely going to be. I disagree with what is being asked of me, but if I stand my ground, I'm likely going to get a C on this assignment and maybe get a B in the course. So the external elements of it outweighed that for me. Now fast forward into grad school, I think there were more options available to me than just do the work and get an A, or say nothing, do what I want and get a B or a C. And so in grad school, I had an opportunity to study post-secondary teaching and learning. And so I came across a book by Ken Bain, What the Best College Teachers Do. And this was something that stood out to me from that book and really resonated with what undergrad Bree had experienced and what she wanted to be different. So I'll read this. I cannot stress enough the simple yet powerful notion that the key to understanding the best teaching can be found not in particular practices or rules, but in the attitudes of teachers, in their faith in students' abilities to achieve, in their willingness to take students seriously and to let them assume control of their own education, and in their commitment to let all policies and practices flow from central learning objectives and from a mutual respect and agreement between students and teachers. And so for me, I think what I was looking for was something that was a little more democratic and engaging. Looking back, and I was a first generation college student, and so it never would have occurred to me to engage the faculty member and say, hey, can you tell me more about why you want me to make these changes? And I realized that's what I wanted my students to do differently in the future, is if they were having questions about my feedback, my grading, how I've written something on the rubric, I wanted them to ask instead of to have this choice, or this assumed choice of like, do what Bree says, or do what I want to do and I'm getting a lower grade, but at least I'm standing up for my voice and my perspective on things. So I created and started engaging students with something called a learning communities agreement. And I'll share the full document with you all, but you can see how there's elements of these past experiences that I had both in undergrad, in grad school, and through my years of teaching that led me to really focus on how can I help students engage. And so basically the learning communities agreement, I draft it, but I communicate with students that it's a draft. And so I give them, and it's an online asynchronous course, so I give them a couple weeks to engage with this. And what I saw happening as a result of engaging students with these norms around engagement, both with each other and with me, is that when they started surfacing their reasons, it really resonated between students. So this was on a Google Doc, and students were commenting on each other's comments saying, that's important to me. There's another one that was on engagement and like how important students wanted their peers to not only show up to engage with the instructor, but to engage with each other. So they have expectations of each other of how they want to engage too. And they want to know that other students in the class are learning and engaging too. That's important to them. They see their peers as being important to their learning experience. So I really wanted to open this up to help students see from each other. So, and what you're seeing here is, so this was just one part of this, Google document, and these are some of the replies that they had. And because I teach a leadership class, there are a few dispositions that I'm hoping students come away with from that class experience, which would be openness, curiosity, and a lot around choice and decision making. And so, as you can see from some of these responses from students, they're getting at some of that. Especially the one from the student labeled C, where he's like, yeah, decision making makes so much sense that we'd be practicing this in our class. And others are like, yeah, we have to wrestle with feedback all of the time. So why not use this class as the opportunity to wrestle with the feedback that we're getting from our instructors, from our peers? That makes sense. And so that's just a little bit of my journey. And I really think everyone in this room probably has something similar to this, some past experiences and identities that influence how you show up and the things you're willing to try and innovate and what you expect of your students. And this does trickle into how we grade in our rubrics too. And I'll get into that in a little bit. So again, these are some of the things that we'll go over. Values, I want you to have an opportunity to hear from each other. Brief overview of rubrics, and then we'll finish with some planning. Some of the things I'll be modeling will be engaging everyone early. So this helps people get present in the room. This helps students get present in the room. And the reason why this is important, especially when we're thinking about things like student mental health, we can't assume that when students enter our classroom spaces that everything else that they've experienced during the day just drops off as soon as they walk into the classroom. So it's really important for us to help students get present to the space that they're in. And one of the ways that I've modeled that is by doing that reactions or type in the chat. So the expectation isn't that a few people are surfacing their perspectives early, but everybody has some opportunity to engage. Short free writing example or activities can help students collect their thoughts. I think this is especially important for quiet students, students who speak English as a second language, or maybe there's some ability stuff that students are navigating. So giving students opportunities to pause and to collect their thoughts before engaging. I showed you using reactions. Undergraduate students love using reactions. Doing a mix between written and spoken discussions. And this can really help, especially students that maybe take a little bit more time to go from learning concepts to really personalizing them and making meaning of them. Written discussions can really help students to bring their best thinking forward instead of their first thinking forward. So I think it's really important to balance both of those. Breaking up lectures. One of the things that I notice is that if I'm getting winded, students are probably also getting tired. Engaging students' emotions and values. There are reasons why they're engaged in your program, and understanding what those are going to help you connect your content to what their interests and values are. They came to your program for a reason. They're engaged in your program for a reason, and knowing what that reason is can help you. And lastly, going back to that perspective from Ken Bain, I think as much as we can share ownership of the class experience, students will really start taking ownership of that and start engaging with their learning, because it's not seen as externally expected, but more internally, intrinsically available and interesting to them. Okay, so now it's your turn. I'm not going to split us into small groups because I think we have a reasonable size discussion group in here right now. But just curious, these are the first reflection questions that you had when you came in. So what values are present for you as you grade and respond to student work? And how do your values show up for you when you are assigning, grading, and responding to student submissions?
I'll start if no one else wants to say anything. Can you hear me? Okay. Well, what I was thinking about is I want to be fair. So I try to grade everyone the same way. So that's the interest in rubrics. And my main point is really I want students to learn from the assignments. So I don't like to have assignments that are just busy work or yeah, I mean, I teach only graduate students, so I really expect them to be there because they really want to learn what I have to offer. And so I try to give them feedback that helps them in that way. That's my main goal. It's not so much like giving them a grade.
Yeah, I tend to rely heavily on rubrics for a writing assignment, only because to your point, Bree, it becomes much easier to explain if you break it out into sections. You did well here, didn't do well there. But the value I'm usually trying to get is, look, we took a lot of concepts here. Now, fast forward, what do you think this looks like in 5 years? And so I'm always very interested to sort of see, aside from how did you apply what we learned, and having someone make a prediction 5 years out is just it's fascinating to watch what I get. But I'll say that the range of material will be I mostly get seniors, some of them great writers, but then the rubric mostly comes to play where the writing just isn't what it should be. And I always struggle with that one. I know how much work it's going to be to help that student get to where they ought to be as seniors. But I'm not willing to give up that assignment because I know what some of the downside is going to be, what I'll discover.
The bridge a little higher. I think about half of us in this room do not teach. And so I'm just here to listen.
Anyone else like to share?
There's a old story from a professor I had back in undergraduate where he said, I thought your conclusion was complete shit, but I love how you got there. So let's talk about how you got there. And I think that's sort of one of my thought processes of as I use rubrics of like, I can tell people not in that extreme of like complete shit, but if there are places where they're not coming to the standards that we expect at this point, I can show that to them in that space, and I can affirm them in the other spaces where I really love what you did and how you got there.
All right, so now the piece y'all have been waiting for. Okay, so rubrics have a very basic design, and there are many types of rubrics, but the ones that most often are used and seen in class, in college classrooms and in Canvas are going to be this style of what's called an analytic rubric. And what you'll see on an analytic rubric is that there will be degrees of development, and in undergraduate experiences, it's almost always going to be on this scale. And this scale of exemplary progression, developing and not at standard, corresponds to our assessment practices. So it's fairly standardized across the undergraduate courses, though it's there's probably more range at the graduate level. And then you'll also see different criterion. And then there's two ways to go about establishing criterion. What's most often seen is The criteria will correspond to different features in the assignment. So it might be a number of references you want students to include. It might be establishing a clear thesis. It might be about, you might be looking for them to integrate class resources. Those would be all fair game and probably established in your assignment to begin with. So you're just checking for these different layers of kind of structure, content, skills and knowledge that are established. And then within the body of your rubric, those are going to be, degrees for each criteria of development. The other side that the other approach you can take to establishing criteria is called more of a global perspective. So you might have a criterion on organization. You might have a criterion on argument development instead of having a specific measurement just for thesis, like establishing a thesis statement. So it might be you're trying to grade and get feedback on general argument development within an assignment. Okay, so of the criteria, class learning experiences are made up of three primary things that we're trying to help students learn and we're trying to convey to them. That's knowledge, which tends to be the most common. So these are core concepts. These are ideas from a discipline that we're trying to relay to students. The other part is skills. So how do we want them to approach a particular task? So from an example from ITI or health services, or even construction management, like learning a project management process would be an example of both. It's both knowledge that you're learning a process, but the actual application of that process would be a skill. And then the last set, which I think most faculty tend to shy away from, but it really orients students to what type of behaviors might be expected of them for their field. And this is called dispositions. So in construction management, for example, a disposition might be safety. You want graduates to be thinking about safety and how to make safe work environments. And ITI, something that I've heard is a disposition is lifelong learning, because in the field of IT, things are constantly changing. So we need our graduates to be able to keep learning. That's a disposition. And then with health services, as another example, equity and equitably engaging with patients and patient care. So those are things that can be represented in your rubric, but figuring out how to represent those can be challenging. And so I wanted to share an example. And so the AACU is a organization that many colleges and the University of Minnesota is a member of. And so the AACU developed what are called value rubrics, and you'll have access to them. There are actually 16, but I think they can be really helpful as examples. And you can actually take, if there's something that resonates with you from any of the value rubrics, you can actually pull those and put those in your classroom rubrics as long as you add a citation. And I've included information on how to do that in the Google folder too. But if you look at this one, and this particular rubric's on intercultural knowledge and competence. And so you can see here they've broken it down by knowledge, skills, and attitudes. And the attitudes that are established in this value rubric were curiosity and openness. And so we can see that there's a range there between, say, take curiosity. So complexity of questions about other cultures, seeks out and articulates answers to these questions that reflect multiple cultural perspectives. And that ranges all the way to states minimal interest in learning more about other cultures. And so I'll say there's a layer of subjectivity here. I think this is where relationships with our students really make up for that, of going from, as Ben was sharing, like, this is shit, to, okay, let's engage a little more deeply than that to figure out what was actually missing here and what they missed. But for the most part, students will get more information than simply getting a grade by developing a rubric. So I think the other side of this is not building rubrics out of fear that you won't get it right, but oftentimes students are getting much more information from rubrics than when they get minimal comments or minimal feedback. Does someone have a question?
Bree, I did. This is extremely useful. And just a question, when it comes to attitudes and dispositions, how do you keep, I mean, I know the subjectivity. How does that work with students who want to challenge a grade, for example? How do you navigate that in terms of, dispositions and attitudes? Thanks.
Yeah, I think being able to share examples, and one of the approaches that I have is using their own work. And if they have demonstrated it elsewhere in their assignments, either in that assignment or previously in class, they'll say, here's how you did this right. I want you to keep doing that. And, I think hearing students want to be heard. And I think that there's just a layer of subjectivity that we have to accept in all this. I don't think it's not something that I lean on or rely on, but I think giving it my best explanation. And in terms of university policy, students are owed some kind of explanation for grading, but we don't have to negotiate grades. We're expected to provide them an explanation. But I think that students are engaging more that way and trying to negotiate grades more. And I'll say that it's not frequent, but I've had to use boundaries a little bit to say, hey, you know what, I provided you an explanation. I think this makes sense and this has been fair. And I have to set a time limit on how much I'm going to engage with this. And there are other resources that students can use if they think that what you're doing is really egregious. I don't think it will be if you're providing them an explanation, but students can. This is the reason that student conflict services exist for the ombudsman. If your students are really concerned about your grading practices, there are arbiters for that. So I've never had it come to that. I think the important thing is really helping students feel heard and understanding and being reasonable and democratic. If they make a good point, being willing to engage that and take them seriously.
I tend to buffer my rubric, which is, again, I focus on writing assignments. I'll always require a draft assignment submission at least a week ahead of time, so that then I can give them the rubric they would get on the draft and give them specific guidance on, okay, now here's how you get to next level on some of these things to work through. So the rubric is never it's always a surprise on the draft, because I think everybody, I get something that isn't always well thought out. But then I get good results in the end for those who want to, take that feedback and readjust. But it does mean, in effect, I do 2 assignments to get 1.
That's a great practice, and actually one that I think you'll hear across academia. As many opportunities as you can provide students to revise, especially on big point assignments, is good. And I will even have students submit to the same Dropbox so I can use the same rubric on the same assignments. Yeah.
Yeah, the upside I get on that is the ones who do really well, I can say, now you can take this grade and just say, yep, consider that my final. So they get an advantage if they work hard on the draft, that they've got 1 final assignment that's done.
Oh yeah. Well, and what deep learning too. They get a chance to engage and think about that feedback that they had. Okay, so I want to get into a little bit of building this kind of middle section here and different techniques that you can try to build out that middle section. And so if you're not familiar with this, this is pretty common now, but it's called the Bloom's taxonomy verbs. And so Bloom's taxonomy essentially establishes that there are different levels, different difficulty in learning different things. So depending on what you're expecting your students to do, and for an introductory course, it's really okay that students are demonstrating knowledge, comprehension, application, and analysis. It's not likely for an introductory course to get into evaluation, synthesis, or even creating something new or developing something new. So these verbs can be really helpful in differentiating between what might be exemplary work and what might be proficient or developing. And so here's an example of that. And so differentiating ability. Maybe you're expecting students to provide a synthesis on something, but they don't quite get there. But that's what exemplary would look like. You want them, say, to develop a new application. But what they do is they describe existing applications. So that might be more in the line of developing if your expectation was for them to develop something new.
Can you switch back? You're not showing the grid right now. You're showing the bibliography.
Okay.
Oh,
Yeah.
no, what one forward? Yeah, I think you were. Yeah, this one. This is what you were talking to, right?
Yeah. So this is useful, and this is the Bloom's. And so going to techniques, I'm using describe. So that would describe falls into knowledge, and then develop falls into synthesis. So these are much synthesizing is a harder intellectual task for students to do. So that's just one. So as you're building out from exemplary, so this is criterion A, and maybe your expectation is for students to develop a new application. And so that's what you're looking for here, is you want to use the word develop if that's your expectation, versus, and this is confusing, this developing line here, you might say what looks like developing would be more like describing current applications. But that's good, but that's not really what exemplary work is looking like. So that's just one technique. So one technique is to look at the Bloom's verbs and distinguish between what would be kind of an entry-level task and students might demonstrate, and what might be a more challenging intellectual task, like developing something new. And I'll show you examples of all of these. So the other part of this is layering. So you might be looking for students to do multiple things. So that would be describe and develop. And that will help students know that these are compounding factors. So an exemplary submission would not only describe, it would describe and develop a new application or theory. And then the last technique is those quantitative distinctions. And so you'll see like an exemplary would include 15+ resources that have informed your thinking. 2, 7 might fall more in line with developing or not at standards. Like, oh, we're really expecting your theory or application to really be drawn from a substantial number of resources or insights. So here I've got another rubric. This one's on teamwork. And so we'll see a couple different things modeled here. One of the techniques that layering technique. So individual contributions outside of team meetings, you can see that there's layering, that a capstone or an exemplary, like if you were grading student teamwork, or if students were grading teamwork, what might they be expecting from each other? And so they might be able to tell, how did my teammates engage me and help me in completing my work? Where were they? How did I show up when I was trying to complete my work? Whoops. So that's an example of layering. If we go down a layer, that fosters constructive team climate. What you'll see here is the makers of this rubric have distinguished, okay, this first area for the capstone layer, students have to do all of those 4 demonstrate all 4 of those behaviors. And then as we go down, we're seeing that it goes from 3 to 2 to 1. And so that's an example of that quantitative or that quantitative approach. So again, just putting a number behind it. And then the last one is, okay, so response to conflict, I think differentiating ability. So we see, again, there's nuance between each of those 4 layers or 4 within that criteria. So it goes from, you know, actively engaging to your students who are maybe showing up more passively and just maybe going along to get along. And again, I think this would be the type of rubric, as a teacher, I would have a hard time with this particular one, but this might be something that I asked students to fill out for a teammate so I could get a sense of how group work was going. And instead of assigning it with a grade, but asking students to respond to what they saw and what they observed in teamwork. So yeah, and I wanted to highlight some, I've got a few minutes left, so just wanted to highlight some of the resources that are already existing and some of my favorites. So Kimmy Johnson is an instructional designer in CCAPS, and I found a really great resource that she developed and a video on the power of rubrics, and especially how to use them in Canvas. So if you've got a rubric in your class assignment, these are going to be so clutch to help get those rubrics from your maybe Google Doc into Canvas so you can use it really flawlessly. I also put up these happy smiley faces of Dan Emery and Matt Lusky from the Writing Center. They are fabulous. They provide teaching consultations, and these do not have to be writing specific. They really view their work as multimodal. So if there's something that you want to consult on with a rubric, it does not have to be writing specific. They also have a great guide for designing music rubrics. And then lastly, CEI, I noticed actually has a couple of great workshops coming up, and those will be not next week, the week after that. So they've got one specifically on rubrics grading and feedback, and then transparent assignment design. On top of, they also do consultations on rubric development. So if you're looking for more one-on-one support, I highly recommend. I've been on the receiving side of these consultations a few times, and they're very supportive. Their aims are to help you teach what you teach, and you'll come away with clarity, and they'll ask really good questions to help you distinguish between criteria and what your expectations are for how you want students to engage in coursework. Okay. So we've got just a few minutes left here, but I was curious, we'll skip the free write, but I'm wondering if from the faculty in the room, if there are specific ways that you have engaged student learners through the grading and rubric process. Just how has it been going for you?
Well, I think about it, as I've kind of said, I wouldn't want to do a writing assignment without a well thought out rubric, because it clearly sort of articulates the things and the structure particularly that I'm going to be looking for. And then when I do my grading, I pull up the rubric and I start commenting within the boxes where I think they landed and why.
All right, well, we're out of time, but the slide deck here, and then I also put an example, or I put a copy of that learning communities agreement that I've used in my class and all the values rubrics. I put all of those into a Google folder for us, so feel free to come back and reference this. And if I can help, or if anyone wants more individualized support, please feel free to reach out. Let me stop screen sharing. Okay, so that's the Google folder, and you'll find all of those value rubrics, and they range from things like civic engagement and creative thinking, to things like, reading. I think there's one on reading, but anyway, there's lots of good ones. You can mix and match. You don't have to use the whole rubric. It's part of the Creative Commons, so they just want you to add a reference to those rubrics. If you mix and match, remix, or just use the whole thing, just make sure you add that note citation in there.
Bree, I think you need to change the access settings.
Oh, really?
Yep. Unless others can get in, I can't. It says I need to request access. So I'm assuming that is happening for others.
Right.
How about now?
Let me try. I'm in.
Okay, cool. Well, enjoy. Reach out if you need any help. I'm always happy to take a look at a rubric too if you're just wanting a second set of eyes. So it's great to see everyone. I hope you have a good rest of your day.
Thank you, Bree.
Great.
Thanks
Thanks,
for attending,
Bree.
everybody. Yep. Thanks for attending, everybody. Have a great day.